So, hi everyone, welcome to today's live. I'm so excited because today we have a very special guest. We have Dr. Dan Sullivan from San Diego. He is a naturopathic and functional medicine specialist. Today we dive into a very important topic, which is the relationship between nutrition and your mental health. So, if you're a mother, if you're a parent, if you are anyone, please grab your cup of coffee and come and listen to us. We will talk about the role of nutrition and how it impacts our mental well-being, how it impacts our attention, our memory, our learning. And we're going to know how simple choices and simple changes in the lunchbox of our children could make a huge difference on their learning, on their memory, and on their behavior as well. I'm waiting for Dr. Dan to join us, and all of us are going to learn from his science. Just a minute, I'll send him the invitation. I am waiting for Dr. Dan. As long as we're talking together, I want you to write me all your questions, especially if you have a child with ADHD. It's very important to learn very important behavioral and lifestyle changes. You need to learn them in order to help your child in his academic life and help him learn better. I am waiting for Dr. Dan. Where are you? Dr. Dan, yes. Dr. Dan is with us. We're joining now with Dr. Dan. Just a minute. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
How are you, doctor?
Good, good. Can you hear me and see me okay?
Yeah, it's great to have you here with us.
Perfect. Thanks for having me. Been
We
looking
are
forward to this.
very happy to have you, and we want to learn everything from your science and from your clinic and from your practice. So to start with, would you explain to us what is the meaning of naturopathic medicine?
Great question. So naturopathic medicine, so I went to school to become a naturopathic doctor. It's very similar to something that's being talked about a lot more these days, like functional medicine. So very
Functional
similar to
medicine.
functional medicine, where it's basically taking a root cause approach to finding, so what are the root causes of dysfunction, right? So whether that's lifestyle, whether that's diet, sleep, stress, all those different things. So taking a look at all those underlying factors and really addressing dysfunction from a root cause level.
So what is the difference between this approach and pharmacology or the use of medicine? Does it, or could we consider it mutually exclusive or not mutually exclusive?
I work with a lot of patients that come to me already on medication. Going down the conventional route. I think that they're both not mutually exclusive at all. I think naturopathic medicine and, Western or conventional medicine can be used and should be used basically in combination. I think that's where we really see the best results with a lot of patients. I think, conventional medicine can be, at least in the US, it can be utilized for more of a symptom suppression. Let's keep people alive. Let's really address whatever could be going on that, we just need to stop the bleeding, right? The more chronic, vague symptoms that people might be experiencing, that's really where naturopathic medicine shines, where people might have tried a medication or, it's just not really working out for them. And so there's a lot of other things that we can do, either in combination with conventional medicine or separately, or
Let me ask you something very important from real practice. How is the impact of nutrition on our mental well-being, on our mood, on mental diseases, on brain diseases? Does nutrition play this great role, or it's just something supplementary or excessive?
I think nutrition has a foundational role to our mental well-being or mental health to things like ADHD and focus, I think it's one of the, I call it a pillar. So for instance, nutrition would be a pillar, sleep would be a pillar, exercise would be a pillar, relationships, community would be another pillar. So I think it's a critical piece of the puzzle when we're thinking about health in general, but especially in mental health. Nutrition, it plays far-reaching effects physiologically on how the brain functions, whether that's through, inflammation. Food can contribute massively to how inflamed we are, both in our body and also into the brain, which I'm sure, as the more inflamed we are, the more tendency that we are to have depression, right, or other mental health conditions. And so I think there's a lot of different, we could definitely go down the rabbit hole with nutrition, but I think it's very, very essential when we're talking about mental health.
Yeah, so let me ask a somehow cunning question, which is genes versus epigenetics, or genes versus nutrition. If someone has the gene of ADHD or has the gene of depression, let's say he's not having enough dopamine or serotonin in his or her brain, is nutrition enough to help this patient live a normal life or have a good quality of life, or medication is a must? And then we will talk about nutrition.
So that's a really good question. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think regardless, it's a case-by-case basis for the patient. In terms of depression, obviously, if they're, thinking about self-harm, or if, it depends on what state they're in, medication can really be a life-changing intervention. And so that can really be a very helpful kickstart to, their care process, their healing journey, right? And so I think that nutrition, naturopathic medicine, or functional medicine can and should be used. I think it's, again, it is that case-by-case basis where if the person is in, a really challenging situation, they may very well benefit from that medication immediately so that they can get some kind of symptom relief, so that they can actually start to do some of these dietary changes and exercise and things like that. Sometimes it does take a pharmacological intervention to get that process started. But I do think inevitably, the nutrition, blood testing, things of that nature, supplementation, those all should be used as well. And then sometimes, my own journey with ADHD, right? I was diagnosed with ADHD in my late teens, was put on medication almost immediately. And I didn't really have the education or the knowledge of these other factors like diet or like supplementation or like doing a comprehensive blood panel to see, what my vitamin D levels were, or, just the basics, or my genetics, were never tested. And so, eventually I'm one of the lucky ones where after doing the functional medicine approach, having a great mentor, changing my diet, getting the right supplements on board, learning the strategies, the lifestyle interventions that really helped me, I was able to no longer take medication. So
I want to stop at the talking about the blood tests. Mainly here in our practice, psychiatrists, when we go and visit the psychiatrist, you will take family history and speak with the person or the patient and start diagnosing. But there's no blood test that has been asked for many patients to diagnose a mental health illness. So correct me if I'm wrong, is there, if I want to know if someone has ADHD or someone has depression, is there certain vitamin deficiencies? Certain, let's say, blood type or more prone for a certain disease than the other. So we need to highlight this because this is not very popular in our culture here.
Yeah, it's not super straightforward. That's why I think it's easier to, have the initial consultation and then prescribe the medication. It's more
Mm,
work. It takes more time. A lot of times medical systems they're just simply not set up for more than a 15-minute office visit. So, these things take time to really understand and to ask about. But to answer your question, there are common deficiencies that I'll see, whether that's in ADHD, whether that's in depression or anxiety. I think some of the most common ones could be an omega-3 deficiency. So
okay.
very, very low levels of omega-3 fatty acids, those that are found in fish oil, very
Mm-hmm.
high levels of omega-6 fatty acids, which are a
Mm.
lot more inflammatory to the body and the brain. Oftentimes, I will see very low levels of vitamin D. I'm here in
Vitamin
California.
E.
Vitamin
Okay.
D, like
Vitamin D,
from the
yes.
sunlight. Uh-huh. So even, despite being in California, where we get a decent amount of sun, you'd think that people would have better levels of vitamin D, but they don't. And so that's another very common one that can make depression, ADHD, anxiety a lot worse. I would say iron. And so
Mm.
not only iron, but doing a full iron panel, including ferritin, which is our storage form of iron.
Mm-hmm.
That's very rarely tested, and that can
So,
be one of the
doctor,
first
regarding
indications.
the ferritin, sorry for interrupting you. Regarding the ferritin, what is the minimum number or the minimum lab test that could be accepted for someone so as not to suffer from mental health diseases? Yeah, I had my hair falling for years until I made ferritin and I discovered that it is very low. And once it was corrected with very few units, it turns يعني the huge impact on the problem has changed. So
For
for
sure.
mental health well-being, what is the levels of ferritin that we should have?
I would say the goal for ferritin, the optimal range would be anywhere from about 70 to 100. And
Okay.
so typically people will come in and a lot of times it's a lot of women, that are menstruating. I'll
Yes.
see ferritin of, 5, 10,
Oh,
single
yes.
digits, which is very, very low. And so it's very difficult to focus or to have energy. Iron
Mm.
is literally what carries oxygen throughout our, bodies and brains. And so it's just a very essential one. So I would say that's the optimal range. I think that, people could certainly start to feel better with their levels at least in the 40s, 50s and beyond, but optimally 70 to 100 is where I like to see most people.
Yeah, we have Nirmeen with us. She's saying, as a teacher, parents can be resistant when we ask them not to bring certain kind of foods. Yes, some parents like get chocolates and chips and fast food in the lunch box of the children. She faces a lot of challenges in the focus and the memory of the students and the learning process. So, how does the food that we put to our children impact their academic life?
It's critical. It's everything. And I think this is a very common struggle that I hear with my patients, especially if, I'm working with a child and the
Yeah.
parents. It's you really need the whole family on board, to make these nutrition changes into something that they do on a regular basis, something that the whole family embraces. And it's tough. It is really tough because I think anywhere in the world, really, we're bombarded with very cheap
Yeah.
foods. We're
Mm.
bombarded with easy, packaged things that are easy to consume. They have long shelf lives. So it is really an uphill battle, but I think it is one that's definitely worth fighting. And I think that it just takes the simple changes, and that's what I tell patients every day is just chipping away. It's not to expect an entire family diet, overhaul overnight. It's just these small changes, and really trying to identify what are those biggest leverage activities or those biggest leverage changes that the family could make so that they'll be feeling better. The children will be doing better in school.
So if I'm now going to prepare a lunchbox for my child and he's spending like 8 hours at school, so I need to put fruits, I need to put proteins, and I need to put something like a snack or a dessert. So what do you recommend? Yani, if I want to have a healthy, balanced lunchbox, what shall I do so my child would be energetic and focused in the school day?
Definitely. So I think you nailed it. The protein, first and foremost, if we're talking about ADHD and focus, is by far the most important thing. I would say if you're going to add one thing or make sure your child is eating one thing, it would be protein. So whether that's from, an organic chicken or turkey or a grass-fed beef or fish, excellent, like salmon, excellent smoked salmon, or even eggs, hard-boiled eggs. That could be a great, kind of a snack or a side option. And then I would say too, I would say vegetables for sure, having some level of fiber. So again, that's going to really balance blood sugar levels, that dietary fiber. You had mentioned fruits. I think some of my favorite are berries, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, things like that. And steering away from things like our, mangoes and pineapples and bananas and things like that, which just generally tend to have a little bit higher levels of sugar. And so those berries are going to have much higher levels of antioxidants, polyphenols that are really going to be helping focus without as much sugar. And then I think, healthy carbohydrates as well, just generally speaking, like a quinoa or sweet potato, basically things that are just very whole food, real whole foods that are just very nutrient dense. And I think, if children are picky, which they most certainly are, can be, with the foods that they're eating or are willing to eat, I think you can definitely modify things like a sandwich to be more healthy, a higher fiber bread, or making sure they're getting, at least some berries on the side, or making sure the meat is higher quality in there, trying to avoid things like, just like the juices and, certainly sodas or just very high sugar things, and just doing your best to have them consume as much real whole foods as possible.
What do you think of stevia? Because my kids love the chocolate, the Nutella, and so I have been resisting until I found other alternatives, chocolate spreads with stevia and alternative sugars. So I use it in order to feel guilt-free. Is this correct, or stevia still there's question marks on it?
I think generally speaking, stevia in moderation is totally fine. That's, I consume it from time to time. I think it is one of those, a much better alternative to, to regular sugar, but then also a better alternative to artificial sweeteners like your aspartame or sucralose, things of that nature, which I think there's been mixed reviews on. I'm erring on the side of caution with those, just because I don't feel like we have the long-term data to really definitively say, are these good or bad? I think there's some people that would say, oh, they're not harmful at all, they're totally okay. I'm just cautious.
Because there is not enough data, and it is very recent, so we didn't see like 10 or 20 years of people consuming this to see what happened to their health. Now, what about the brain-gut axis? And let us simplify the idea to the audience, because not everyone here is from a medical point of view or from the medical field, so we need to understand what we eat affects our intestinal bacteria. So could you explain this to us, the gut-brain axis?
Definitely. So think of the gut and the brain as not two isolated organs. There's constant communication between the gut and the brain, and then between the brain down to the gut. And so that communication pathway happens through what's called the vagus nerve or cranial nerve 10, which it comes from the brain and it travels all the way down and it connects to all of our different organs, our liver and our stomach and our small intestine. And so that's basically how our brain and our gut communicate with each other. And so it's a very important connection. And, you know, when people think about, oh, you know, I might be experiencing bloating or stomach issues, and they think of that as just isolated to the stomach only. But I'm here to tell you that that has far-reaching effects in those symptoms, or that whether it's, you know, you had mentioned the gut microbiome or the gut bacteria. If there's imbalances there, or if you're having symptoms like, you know, the bloating or constipation or leaky gut or different, any one of those symptoms, that can affect you systemically, and also it can affect brain function. And so interestingly, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, if I would want to know if I have a leaky gut, and to simplify it, leaky gut means that my intestine is not, the cells are not tight enough, and there is exchange of material between the blood and the intestine, and there is inflammation and inflammatory markers that are moving from my blood into my intestine and vice versa. So how is there a certain test to do to just make sure that I have a firm or a good gut, or I have a leaky gut?
There is. So I will typically do a comprehensive stool analysis on most patients. And there's a marker that's called zonulin, which can indicate the leakiness of the gut barrier.
Okay. And how does this leaky gut affect depression? And how, if I make some changes in my nutrition, I could affect my mood?
Definitely. So I think, like you just mentioned, you know, with leaky gut, the cells that line the intestine are leaky. Basically, they're supposed to be tight together, and they begin to pull apart. And so what happens over time is that anytime we're eating foods, we are basically, you know, the food is supposed to be broken down. It's supposed to be digested. And so it's not supposed to get through the gut lining. And so when we have these larger gaps between the cells in the gut, bacteria, toxins, undigested food particles then get through the gut lining right into the bloodstream. And so how that affects depression is that that process of those molecules seeping through the gut barrier, that will trigger inflammation. And we know that inflammation makes depression worse. And that inflammation, unfortunately, doesn't just stay, again, localized to the gut. It does travel systemically and up to the brain.
Okay. Let us focus more on ADHD. So for mothers with children with ADHD, what food should we avoid, and what lifestyle should we avoid before running into medication and giving our children Adderall or Ritalin or all these brain stimulants? So what can I do in order behaviorally for my child with ADHD?
Can you repeat that last part you just cut out there?
I mean, I want to do some behavioral changes or lifestyle changes, nutrition, sleep, whatever, before I run into giving Ritalin or any stimulants. If the doctor diagnosed my child with ADHD, so and he prescribed me a medication, shall I go and give him the medication, or try some non-pharmacological approaches before giving this drug? Because we have fear here. We hear Egyptian mothers, when we hear a drug that is acting on the CNS for a child, we freak out.
Yeah.
What do you advise us?
I think it's, you know, whether or not to take medication, that's ultimately up to the parent and the prescriber. That is done by a case, you know, in a case by case manner. So I'm not able to, you know, give that advice here on Instagram. I think that is a conversation that you do have to weigh the pros and cons of the medication, where your child is at, how significant are the symptoms, how disruptive is the condition to the quality of life, of daily life, is going, you know, do the pros outweigh the cons of a medication? That's a personal decision, and a decision that every family will have to make. But I do think, regardless of that decision, that these, you know, lifestyle changes, these dietary changes can still be done, whether or not they go on medication. So I think some of the biggest ones, I would say, we talked about protein already. I think that's a hugely important intervention to be done with breakfast. So making sure the child is not skipping breakfast or just having, you know, just bread or carbohydrates by themselves. I think that's a very easy way to make ADHD a lot worse, is just by having, you know, sugar, you know, refined carbohydrates, bread, you know, pancakes, things like that. So I would highly recommend encouraging the parents to have protein with breakfast and with every meal. I think exercise is incredibly therapeutic. It should be a prescription, in my opinion.
Yes.
I love team sports, especially, you know, I was a hockey player, so I love hockey. I don't know how much hockey they have in Egypt, but I know pickleball is not really. So I know pickleball is quite common here in California. Tennis, you know, ping pong, any racket sports are fantastic for the brain and ADHD.
This is a very important piece of information, Doctor. Please say it again. Sports like racket, squash, tennis, all this is very beneficial to children with ADHD. Maybe it connects their motor skills with their nervous system, something like this. But these are one of the best sports for them is the racket or table tennis or something like this. Am I correct?
Definitely so. Definitely so. Yeah, there's an area in the back of the brain under the visual cortex, so called the cerebellum, which governs a lot of our balance, our coordination, eye movements. And so those of us with ADHD typically have a lesser developed cerebellum, and that really governs some of our emotional control. And not to get too technical, but it does have what's called like a feed forward loop and connects to the other areas of the brain, like the frontal lobe. And so by doing racket sports, it's a very helpful intervention for activating that part of the brain and helping the different parts of the brain to better connect and wire together.
Wire better, yes. So, are you with the idea of doing activities for neuroplasticity, like my dominant hand is the right hand, so I would go and brush my teeth with my left hand. I would close my eyes and walk in the dark and test my spatial memory. All of this, it is said that it makes new neurons and there's new neural networks. So can this help, or it is out of context? Like brushing my teeth with my left hand can help me focus in my academic career?
I think so. I think it's always a good idea to be challenging the brain so that we're not, you know, stuck in the same groove. And I think, you know, simple things too, to add to that point, where I do recommend a lot for patients is, you know, brushing the teeth with your left hand if you normally brush with the right hand. In addition to that, balance exercises. So whether that's standing on one foot and then brushing the teeth with the other hand, you know, combining those types of interventions, I think, is really helpful. And so the balance in particular, I think, could be very helpful.
The balance, you mean like ballet, like gymnastics. Also, these sports help children with ADHD.
Exactly.
Okay.
Balancing again, activating that cerebellum
Yeah,
again,
exactly.
similar to racket sports.
Mm. Now, let me ask you, what about adults? Adults who are underdiagnosed with ADHD. Recently, we have been hearing that most of our children, in all our circles, we have parents and children with ADHD. But it is really hard to diagnose an adult with ADHD. It is sometimes confused with misbehavior. So tell me how to know
Mhm.
if I'm dealing with a spouse or a friend suffering from ADHD, so as not to confuse it with misbehaving.
Mm. Yeah, it's in adults it can be quite challenging. And a lot of adults, I see this a lot where they may come in and they're 40 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old,
Exactly.
and they're, saying I'm resonating with these symptoms I'm hearing online. Because I think as we get older, ADHD is a condition that we can sometimes grow out of, but not always. And so I think
Mm.
as adults, it can be challenging, certainly. So I think
Mm.
working with a qualified mental health practitioner to make
Mm.
that diagnosis is definitely going to
Mm.
be critical. But it can be challenging because adults will learn to manage it, or they'll just think this is normal. This is just normal life. I don't think I have anything that's going
Mm.
on, or I don't think I have a diagnosis. And so it can be incredibly uh, it can be incredibly helpful sometimes if an adult does get the diagnosis. That
Yes.
way they can get the proper help that they need, and just whether or not it's a medication, it's just that understanding that that their brain is just simply working differently, and that's
Differently, yes,
okay.
exactly.
And they
Yes.
just need to learn different skills or strategies or lifestyle
Mm.
interventions, and uh, to really help. you know
Yeah, if you don't have this awareness, if, for example, my spouse or my couple forgets my birthday, so I would say that he doesn't care or something like this. But
right.
people remembering a lot of stuff, is the problem in the short-term memory or in the long-term memory?
That's a great question. I think for
I guess it is in the small events that are being repeated daily. Is that you're not focusing. So you forget what is going between the lines. You just take headlines, the big picture.
Yeah, certainly. And I think to add to that, there's this concept of what's known as time blindness with ADHD,
Ah,
where the the whole dopamine pathway, which is highly implicated in ADHD, helps us to regulate time, basically, how much time has passed.
yes.
And so it's very difficult for some people with ADHD to manage time. You'll notice a lot of people, they might forget something, or they might be
Yeah.
late all the time. And so it's very helpful to, I do this myself, is to have literally, I have a timer here, a visual timer that
Oh, yes.
I'll put it, to have the time, and it will go off. And that's one way of really keeping track of, the time that's passing. Also using calendars and different reminders
Very
can
important.
really be strategies to help us. So instead of,
Mhm.
because that can be it can be traumatic, I think, for some people with ADHD,
Mhm.
and it can cause a lot of shame around, being told, oh, you don't care, they really do. It's just, it just slips their mind at the time, and they just were
Mhm.
not able to remember the birthday or whatever. And so I think it's, if you are somebody with ADHD, it's a matter of understanding that, not beating yourself up about those things, but
This is very important.
kind of taking a step back and then asking yourself, how can I set up better structure or better systems in my life to keep better track of these things, basically.
One of the very, very common problems in ADHD is boredom and time perception. ADHDs or people suffering with ADHD have different time perception or process time in a different way. And thus they are always bored. Why are they always bored? Because they don't have the basal level of dopamine as normal brain. So they need to be bombarded with continuous stimulus in order to, so I know this very well, in order to feel good. After a while, there is, and I saw this beautiful reel on your page, ADHD burnout. So please tell us how to protect someone with ADHD from being burnt out, because what makes me or makes others get or feel burnt out is this continuous activity or seeking dopamine strikes. So what's your advice?
Yeah, I think it's tricky. It's tricky with ADHD because we are constantly seeking those things that stimulate dopamine, because we do, as you mentioned, have lower levels of baseline dopamine typically. But if we are constantly seeking those things, like, flipping through social media, looking through very highly stimulating, highly edited, dramatic videos.
Risky behaviors, even.
Risky behaviors, gambling, things to really stimulate the dopamine, caffeine. That if we're constantly dumping a lot of dopamine at once, those receptors will get desensitized.
Exactly.
And so leading to that burnout. And so we really have to protect ourselves and try to keep dopamine at a stable level. And so trying to really avoid those chronic spikes and those activities that really will spike and then crash our dopamine levels.
Because there's a crash. After this spike, there's a crash.
Inevitably, there's going to be a crash after a high dopamine activity, and then we're going to be feeling that burnout. And so instead, like for instance, what I'll do is I'll literally set a timer for myself, because that's a way of adding in a little bit of time pressure, which that pressure, that deadline.
The deadline pressure, you mean?
What's that?
The deadline pressure. I mean, if you're dealing with someone having ADHD, you have to put him deadline and you have to stress him, because this last minute stress is very dopamine driving for ADHDs.
Exactly.
What about cortisol? Now, this is very unhealthy.
What's that? Sorry?
I'm saying, what about cortisol? So all of this stress would burn out the patient from cortisol, or it will spike the cortisol in the blood, which will lead to other health consequences. And we need to highlight this awareness very much.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, cortisol is something that we test in the blood very regularly. And yeah, it's definitely affected by those chronic hits of stress, those deadlines, especially if we aren't, consciously making our own deadline.
Yes.
If we're relying on external deadlines and we're really waiting to the last moment, and then we're really, using that deadline to, it can certainly raise our cortisol tremendously, which, as you mentioned, is not good for general overall health. And so I think it's a matter of, thinking a little bit more ahead and giving ourselves some of those lower pressure deadlines. Yeah. So, yeah.
What do you think of the gym as resistance training, as a cure, or could it be a cure? by the way, for ADHD, or not that much?
Well, I think that it's certainly one, again, going back to those pillars, I think it's one of those essentials in the management of ADHD. I think that with ADHD, well, I like the term management instead of cure. I
Yeah,
think
exactly.
it's an ongoing process, right? And even with myself, it's an ongoing daily practices that really keep my mind focused and sharp. It's not this kind of event that happens, a cure, and then it's kind of good. So I think exercise certainly is one of those things that I think is absolutely critical in the ongoing management of ADHD.
What about histamine? Because I have seen a reel on your page, and it was the first time for me to know this information, and I'm very thankful to know it from you. Food that is left in the refrigerator and how it triggers histamine reactions in our children. And we do use this in the lunchbox. So please talk to us about, because we have a lot of children here suffering from asthma, suffering from hypersensitivity reactions, and we don't know the reason. So what about this food that is remained in the refrigerator?
Definitely so. So this, I would say, is not an issue for everyone, but I would say it can affect those with mental health, especially with ADHD. So food that's left in the refrigerator more than, let's say 1 or 2 days. If we're leaving it in the 3, 4 days, 5 days, that can build up something called histamine, which can be very excitatory to the brain, and it can exacerbate all kinds of different mental health symptoms, ADHD being one of them. And so in the States, there's a lot of people that are complaining about things like mast cell activation syndrome, or MCAS, which is basically a histamine issue. And so a lot of people can have problems processing histamine. And so, again, not a problem for everybody, but in some kids, certainly it can be a big issue, and they can mimic or worsen a lot of those ADHD symptoms. So the other histamine foods, like leaving foods in the refrigerator, certainly, aged cheeses or, smoked meats, jerkies, things like that. Canned foods can generally contain higher amounts of histamine. Wine is another one. Although kids certainly aren't drinking wine, but just one of those things to keep in mind for adults too.
Yeah. What do you think of resveratrol? I think it's very trendy in science these days. Because you mentioned wine, but red wine contains resveratrol. I mean, what about if we put grapes for our children or blueberries? This resveratrol, can it help children with ADHD?
I think,
Or there is no enough study?
I think the amount of resveratrol from wine or from grapes, I think, and I don't know too much about this topic, unfortunately. I know that resveratrol is a powerful anti-inflammatory. I do use it as a supplement. I don't know that we can really get a therapeutic dose, something that's really going to make a difference from the wine that we drink. I think you would need to drink a lot of wine, which would counter the benefits of the resveratrol, unfortunately. So I think if you're going to use it, probably using it in a supplement form.
So do you think we should give our children multivitamins? Do you recommend this just to make sure that they have their minimum requirements from vitamins, minerals, and so on? Or just depend on nutrition?
I think it depends on nutrition. However, I will say I can't speak to the food supply in Egypt, but I know in the United States it is quite poor. Our soil quality, the nutrient density of the foods that we grow here are just simply nowhere near as nutritious as they once were, 30, 40, 50 years ago. It's orders of magnitude less nutritious of food. And so for that reason, a lot of kids that come in, I test their blood and they
Mm.
are deficient. And so I think it's generally not a bad idea to give, just about every child a multivitamin with the caveat of making sure that it's a very high quality
Mm.
multivitamin. I know that there
Very
are
important.
a lot that are using, synthetic B vitamins,
Mm.
not very good quality, not very good absorbability. So that is something, obviously talk to your
Mm.
doctor about before trying anything, because it is case by case. It depends on the child, of course,
Mm.
but generally speaking, not a bad idea.
Okay. And this question is, I'm very much intrigued to ask the NAD and the trend of the NAD plus. And
Mm.
should we, not talking here about ADHD, but talking about anti-aging. It's very trendy, and there are a lot of ads advocating the use of NAD as supplements or IV drips. Do you agree with this?
We do. So I work at a clinic here in San Diego. We do offer NAD IV therapy in
Yeah.
conjunction with other vitamins, nutrients. We can also do that either subcutaneously in an injection,
Mm-hmm.
or like you said, you can take oral forms of that, typically precursors, like NMN or NR.
Mm-hmm.
You'll typically see like a nicotinamide riboside. Um, I think it's the IVs. I mean, I typically do one about once a month personally. I do see benefit in them in terms of anti-aging, in
Yes.
terms of cognitive function, in terms of helping mitochondrial function.
Mm-hmm.
I think NAD can be a very powerful adjunctive therapy in the context of a good diet, proper gut health, sleep, etc. I know there's a lot of good, interesting research about NAD coming out with fertility, which we're
Yes.
having big, big fertility
Problem
challenges
with.
here in the States. And so that's one of those things that can really help to improve egg quality, sperm quality, help to reduce DNA damage. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think in the context, maybe not a fix all by any means, but I think it can be a useful therapy.
Do we have enough safety studies, enough toxicological studies, or like surveillance for people who were on NAD for like, let's say not pharmacoeconomics. I mean, there's a branch which like uh, you take care of the patient or the client who used a certain drug for a certain time in order to make
Hmm.
sure that the drug is safe. So do you think regarding the NAD, we have enough safety experiments and safety studies?
I think we need more. I think we
Yeah.
need more long-term data, certainly. It's a
Mm-hmm.
newer intervention. Um, Everything that I've seen would suggest that it's
Yeah.
likely safe,
Mm-hmm.
but again, we don't know for certain.
So this is just something that comes in my mind, that NAD repairs the DNA. Could it trigger cancer cells, or could it hyperactivate the mitosis process or the differentiation of cells? And instead of
Hmm.
being anti-aging, it goes into activating cancer cells or cancer signals between cells.
Hmm. Certainly, that is a concern.
Mm.
Certainly. It's the same thing that we hear a lot with a lot of peptides these days that
Yeah,
people are talking
exactly.
about. The BPC 157 or the CJC ipamorelin combinations.
Mm.
Um, Certainly there is that risk, right? If
Mm.
there is and that's why we do on everybody or every patient that before they would get something like that, we're screening them for cancer
Exactly.
history, to
Mhm.
make sure that that's unlikely.
So, as we are heading to the end of our discussion, I want you to tell us, please, about the Oasis, your project about the Oasis, and how can we globally benefit from it?
Certainly. So Oasis Health and Medicine is a practice that I've co-founded with a good friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Petty Mirdamati, and it's here in sunny San Diego. And we practice functional medicine. We do a lot of consultations with patients. We do a lot of testing there. We do the testing right there in office. Um, we do a lot of IV therapy, PRP, different interventions. And so we're always putting out content online, on social media. We're writing blogs. I'm trying to do more long form content. So I'm glad you asked me to do this. YouTube, things of that nature. So I think checking out just the content that we put out online, and then on the website oasishealthmedicine.com, if anybody's curious, they can certainly go on there. We have some very good articles written up about ADHD, about mental health, about NAD therapy, about all these other topics that people can reference worldwide. And then I would say, in terms of worldwide, I am very excited to be, actually, I haven't even announced this publicly, but I am launching a course and a community based around ADHD. So it's called Natural ADHD Solutions. So it's a whole 6-pillar video modules plus a community that I am actually just launching. So
this is lovely. This is very, very empowering and very important. So could we have this, or could people from different parts of the world join or benefit from the service of this club, the ADHD club, and from the service of Oasis?
Certainly, certainly. So we do see there would be clients internationally, certainly. So if somebody is wanting one-on-one support, I do have international clients. I'm not able to do the testing, right? Since I'm not licensed in those other places, it's considered a health consulting visit, but I'm able to point people in the right direction in terms of the testing or the different questions that they might ask their doctor.
Yeah.
And so that's one way to work with me, is one-on-one. And then the other is, if you have ADHD, a lower barrier to entry with that program. That's really why I made it, because I was getting a ton of just comments, a lot of interest in ADHD and learning more. So I put everything I know into those modules, into that course, to try to educate people on a deeper level when it comes to ADHD and what could be done about it naturally.
This is very, very, very important. So my final question, I have a lot of questions, but please promise me that we'll have you again for another discussion in the near future.
For
but
sure.
My final question,
I'd love to.
what 3 tips would you give us all? The best 3 tips for a good mental health?
Number 1 would be to protect your morning. It would be to spend that time in the morning without your phone, whether that's reading, whether that's meditating. Connect with yourself, connect with your goals, connect with your higher power. I think that's a essential piece of mental health, is really starting the day on the right foot. I think, gosh, this is hard. There's so many.
I would say sleep. Good night's sleep. I mean, good night's sleep. Sleep hygiene.
Certainly, sleep hygiene. Yeah, I think that could be number 2. Protecting the end of the day as well. So the front of the day and the end of the day. So eliminating electronics.
Yes.
Really letting the nervous system wind down. Reading something. Trying to turn off the blue lights, electronics. Bright lights, and really letting the body and the brain and nervous system relax before sleep. And then I would say I could certainly talk about diet and supplementation and testing and all that, but I think who you spend time with is incredibly important.
Very
So,
important.
making sure that you're around people that uplift you, that challenge you, that support you. I think that's such an incredible part of mental health because the people that you spend time with do rub off on you. And I would say on the flip side too, for yourself, showing up in the best way you can to uplift the people around yourself as well.
This is very beautiful. And if I would add something to all this very fruitful discussion, is that people with ADHD suffer from impulsivity. So when we, and I have a child with ADHD, so that's why I've tried a lot of strategies. Teach the child to have delayed gratification. Instant gratification and instant rewards is really dangerous, or is not very, and it's not beneficial for the child. So teaching them and teaching ourselves to delay gratification, I think it is one of the important stuff that we should learn.
I would 100% agree with that. That's such an important piece. Yeah, and it is a muscle that can be trained, like anything. And I think that, with any of the things that we talked about today, it's not expecting perfection, or it's not, trying to take on too much, but recognizing those small wins in the process, and just, practicing consistency, and recognizing that things will get better, over time.
Thank you very much. And I have a promise now that we will meet again in the near future. I'm very grateful, Doctor, really, and I really learned a lot from you. So thank you very much. Thank you for agreeing to be with us, and
Of course.
wish you a beautiful day. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Doctor. Take care. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone, for watching us. See you again. Bye.